Hi, everyone. Today we're going to cover the topic that is much coveted by crab team monitors, and that is the ability to quickly and confidently tell the difference between our two similar native shore crab species, hairy shore crabs and purple shore crabs. Being able to quickly and confidently distinguish between these two cryptic species can really speed up your data collection and improve the data verification process as well. But it's not necessarily an easy thing to learn how to do. In fact, it's one of the hardest things we do as crab team monitors. And that's because compared to some of the other crab species that we see in our trapping, compared to say Dungeness crab or helmet crabs, hairy and purple shore crabs share more features that are similar to each other than they do that distinguish them. They're both relatively small crabs. They both have relatively square shells. They're about as wide as they are long. They both have three marginal teeth to the outside of either eye, and they both have two rostral bumps between their eyes. Lastly, they both have such variable colorations to them that it can not only be sort of confusing to look at coloration, it can actually be directly misleading if we were to rely on coloration to tell the difference between these two species. So what do we do? How do we make the decision if we only have a single crab or shell in our hand? How do we make the decision about what we're looking at? Well, with any ID features, we typically group the features into three different categories in terms of how informative they are to distinguishing between the species. Features might be considered diagnostic, or confirmatory, or supportive in terms of how much information they give you and how reliable that information is to distinguishing between hairy and purple shore crabs. Now, by diagnostic, we mean that that feature and its presence or absence all by itself is both necessary and sufficient to decide which species we have. So really all we need is one diagnostic feature, and based on whether it's there or not, we can tell what crab we have. By confirmatory features, we're talking about ones where their presence will help you tell what species it is, but the absence of that species doesn't provide you enough information to distinguish between hairy and purple shore crabs. So these are features that are helpful if you see them, but if you don't, you're going to have to look elsewhere to figure out what species you're looking at. Now, lastly, supportive features. Here we're talking about features that are generally associated with one species or the other. They're trends in favor of one or the other. These features lend support to our confirmatory or diagnostic features. There are so many exceptions to supportive features that we never consider these features to be proof of one species or another, but rather these features can be helpful to increase your confidence that the diagnostic or confirmatory features are pointing you in the right direction. So these three categories are arranged by order of priority here. And the top diagnostic category is the most informative. And the top categories will override any categories below them in terms of how important that information is to decide which of the two crabs we have. So how does this apply to our native shore crab species? Well, we're going to go through both shore crabs side by side and cover each type of feature one at a time. So first, let's talk about diagnostic features for the shore crabs. So we use two diagnostic features for hairy and purple shore crabs. Hairy shore crabs, Heor, will be on the right side of our screen, and purple shore crabs will be on the left side. The first diagnostic feature we usually emphasize is the shape of the marginal teeth. Both hairy and purple shore crabs have three marginal teeth, but the shape of those teeth is distinctive in a consistent way between the two species. Heor, the hairies, have what we call jagged marginal teeth. They jut forward and outward relative to the crab's shell, almost like the teeth of a jagged saw. By contrast, Henu have relatively smooth, inward-facing marginal teeth. In this case, it's almost as if someone took a piece of sandpaper to the edge of a Heor shell and rubbed those marginal teeth down until they were almost reduced to the height of the shell itself. Another way to look at the teeth is actually to look for the space between the teeth. So because the hairy shore crab have more pronounced outward facing marginal teeth, the notches between the teeth themselves are actually more noticeable and larger. They have deep notches. Purple shore crabs barely have notches between their marginal teeth, and they almost appear as just a faint blip on the radar there. And that's, again, because it looks like someone sanded the teeth down so that the notches aren't quite as deep. You might have heard us use a few visual metaphors to describe the difference between the marginal teeth shape for hairy and purple shore crabs. And sometimes these metaphors can help you get a felt sense of what that sort of interpretive difference between the shape might feel like to you. So for instance, we might ask, if you had a nylon stocking and you rubbed it along the edge of the shell, which species would snag the nylon stocking more than the other? The jagged marginal teeth of the hairy shore crab generally give you the sense that that would ruin a nylon stocking a lot more effectively than sawing at it with the edge of a Henu shell. Another metaphor that we have used from time to time is imagining what a laser beam or a lightsaber or a headlight that is attached to the marginal teeth or shooting out the front of the marginal teeth of each of these crab species might look like. We might imagine that the forward-facing marginal teeth of the hairy shore crab would have laser beams that point straight ahead, while the inward-facing marginal teeth of the purple shore crab would have laser beams that cross at an angle right in front of the face of the crab. These are visual metaphors that may be helpful to you. It's okay if they aren't. They don't work for everyone, but we find that some people sort of connect more with one of those metaphors as an easy way to remember the difference in the marginal teeth between the two species. In addition to the shape of the marginal teeth, the shape of the rostral bumps is also a diagnostic feature for hairy shore crabs and purple shore crabs. Now, the rostral bumps, of course, are between the eyes, so let's put some fake eyeballs on the large crabs we have here. So between these eyes, hairy shore crabs have what we consider to be more pronounced or distinct rostral bumps, while the rostral bumps of purple shore crabs are more reduced, again, almost as if they've been sanded down compared to the hairy shore crab. Another piece of information that you might gain from looking at the rostral bumps is not the bumps themselves, but the notch between the bumps. Hairy shore crabs, because they have more prominent rostral bumps, also have a clear notch between those bumps, right in the center of their face. This notch is much less detectable in purple shore crabs, in large part because the rostral bumps themselves are much smaller. Okay, so those are the two diagnostic features that we use for hairy and purple shore crab. Let's move on to the confirmatory features. Hairs on legs turns out to be a confirmatory feature for hairy shore crab. If the hairs are present, we know that we have a hairy shore crab. That's one of the features that actually makes a hairy shore crab a hairy shore crab. But if the hairs are absent, that may be because it's a purple shore crab, but it also could be for other reasons. For instance, if all you have is a molt, you may not have the crab legs at all. And so you don't have the information you need to know if that crab used to have hairs. Also, if you have molts of crabs, you may not have the legs at all. So you would never be able to see the hairs even if they were present. And even if you do have the legs, often we find that molts lose the hairs before they lose the legs. The hairs on the molts are relatively fragile, so they might disappear, and it might look like the legs have no hairs, but it's just that they've actually fallen off. So hairs aren't reliable if they are absent, but if they are present, you definitely have a hairy shore crab. Now for purple shore crabs, a confirmatory feature is those polka dots on the claws. If you have polka dots, and we're talking about pretty large, evenly spaced dots on the claws of the crabs, you know you have a purple shore crab. However, if those dots are absent, you need to look at other features. The reason for this is that sometimes the crabs are missing their claws, as in the case of this bottom gravid female, Or sometimes the coloration of purple shore crabs isn't what we'd expect, and purple shore crabs don't always have the polka dots. Now, I want to say when I'm talking about polka dots, I'm not talking about the really tiny flecks that you occasionally will see on the claws of the hairy shore crab. On hairy shore crabs, these spots just appear as almost tiny flecks, almost pinpricks. The polka dots, again, on purple shore crabs are the large, regularly sized, regularly spaced. They really look quite festive, if you ask me. So those are two confirmatory features, one for each of our species of shore crab. Lastly, I'm going to talk about a couple of supportive features. So we have a few lines of evidence that we can use to support our identification from the other categories. Those are generally size, habitat, and color/pattern. Remember that these features are based on general correlations across our trapping, our habitats, and across our observations. They're not at all hard and fast rules, and there are so many exceptions. But again, they can be used to increase your confidence in your identification if it agrees with with the trends for these species, or if it doesn't agree, it might encourage you to take a closer look and just be double sure that your species is what you think it is. So first, size. Though hairy shore crabs have been reported to be as large as almost 50 millimeters, the largest collected at crab team sites to date have been closer to 27 to 28 millimeters, and the vast majority of hairy shore crabs are smaller than 25 millimeters. So take your time and maybe take some photos of any suspected hairy shore crabs that are larger than 25 millimeters. And then by contrast, we typically don't find many small purple shore crabs in the traps, that is, crabs that are less than about 25 millimeters. So this is generally a good size cutoff to give you a pause if the crab doesn't align with your size expectations based on our trapping history. Habitat. So because we target different habitat types, we find that hairy and purple shore crabs tend to show up at some sites more than others. Hairy shore crabs tend to do better in sites that are really mucky, relatively warmer sites, and somewhat siltier compared to purple shore crabs, which really seem to do better at cooler sites with greater water flow and sometimes characterized by, say, cobble or larger substrate types. Again, this is not a hard and fast rule. There's lots of mixing between the habitats, but if you have a really mucky site and you think you found a purple shore crab, that would just be relatively unusual, and so a good cause to double check your ID with the other features. And then lastly, color. And of course, we've spent so long saying how bad color is as a distinguishing feature between the two crab species because there's so much variation. However, there are some color characteristics or patterns that can be a little bit informative, especially as you start to get a flavor of what crabs look like over and over and over again. One is that hairy shore crab tend to have splotchier patterns to them. You can see on the pattern of this large shell that the crabs have these chromatophores that cluster into unequal sized dark patches. By contrast, the purple shore crab has a more solid, dense coloration, where the purple patches are roughly an even color, and they're quite dense in their color. You'll see some light colored spots, but between those light spots, the color is very even. Of course, as I mentioned, these tend to be supportive features rather than either confirmatory or diagnostic because we have some really sophisticated imposters. I put up examples here of my favorite imposters. On the left is the most convincing purple hairy shore crab I've ever seen. However, the dead giveaway is the very clear legs on the shells, or hairs on the legs. And on the right is the best imitation of hairy shore crab that I have ever seen a purple shore crab do, including a relatively splotchy color pattern. But the shape of the shell is a dead giveaway. In both of these cases, I almost imagine somebody in Groucho Marx glasses, but their mustache is sort of hanging partially off. So just to review, the diagnostic features are the gold standard for identification, but it's a little tricky, we admit, because it does take time to hone your search image and what we call a heuristic for these features, because they're not binary. It's not the difference between 3 marginal teeth and 5 marginal teeth to tell these things apart. It's a little bit more descriptive, and you get a gut sense of these things after having looked at thousands and thousands of crabs. So we've created sets of resources like the flashcards that are in the volunteer toolbox that are actually designed to get your brain to learn these patterns, these recognition patterns, what we call heuristics, before you know what you're looking at. In addition, each species has one confirmatory feature, lucky for us, but the absolute key to confirmatory features is remembering that if you don't see that feature on your crab or your molt, you still don't know which species you have, and you have to look to other parts of the crab to get your answer. And then lastly, and lowest in the order of priority, are these general association features, these supportive features. These are the ones that are associative between the species that we find in our trapping efforts, not hard and fast rules by any stretch. These include size, habitat, and color pattern. If you have exceptions to these, it's a good reminder, it's a good little alert notification popping up on your phone to double check your ID with your teammates. Say, hey, does this actually look like what I think it is? And with Crab Team HQ, particularly if it's a relatively rare species or a real edge case at your site. Even go ahead and take a picture, even if you don't think you're going to send it to us. It's good to have in your back pocket in case we can't see it in the bin photo. So thanks for diving into the shore crab details with us. Surely being able to tell these two very cryptic and similar cousins apart from each other will make you extremely popular as a guest at cocktail parties, but certainly it will make you a next level crab team volunteer. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's a special secret superpower that we hope that you, and we are sure that you all will very soon become super adept at.